In 1900, the streets of cities were mostly filled with horses and carriages. Cars were toys for millionaires, assembled by hand and costing as much as a luxury home. But in just 20 years the world would change. Horses, which had been humanity's primary mode of transportation for thousands of years, would disappear from cities forever. Millions of ordinary Americans switched to their own cars, and a vehicle appeared on the roads that became a symbol of a new era. It was created by the Ford Motor Company, and the man behind it was Henry Ford. An engineer, an inventor, and perhaps even a genius. An entrepreneur who sought to improve the lives of the working class, yet was simultaneously an enemy of labor unions, a proponent of totalitarian methods, an anti-Semite, and an idol of Adolf Hitler. He did not invent the automobile, nor did he invent the assembly line, as is commonly believed. But he was able to create something unique that would transform the economy of the 20th century. All of this is about the hero of our story. It is well known that the Ford family has Anglo-Irish root. Henry's grandfather and his father emigrated from Ireland in 1847 to escape the potato famine and settled near Dearborn in the state of Michigan, which is now a suburb of Detroit. It was there, in 1863, on a family farm in Springwell Township near Dearborn, that Henry Ford was born. From childhood, Henry showed an interest in machines and all kinds of technical devices. When he was just 12 years old, Ford recalled two significant events that took place in his life. For his birthday, his father gave him a mechanical watch, which he began to take apart and put back together to understand how it worked. Before long, he became so skilled at this that people from all over the county brought their watches to the young Ford for repair. At the same age, Henry saw a steam engine for the first time in his life. It was a portable Westinghouse steam engine. The engineer, Fred Reedon, allowed the young Ford to climb aboard and even try operating the controls. This impressed him so much that he vowed to build his own steam-powered vehicle, capable of moving under its own power. To provide a broader understanding, we need to describe in greater detail the period when Ford was established and grew. Because of its close cultural ties to England, the Industrial Revolution arrived in the United States comparatively early. And by the time Henry Ford was born in 1863, many cities in the country were hubs of industrial activity. America was also becoming a center of innovation. The factory, the steam engine, and the railways might have all evolved in England. But by the second half of the 19th century, American inventors were starting to eclipse their British cousins in important ways. Most notably, Thomas Edison, the man who, more than any other, began the electrification of the world. All of this was important in framing the background against which Henry Ford would make his own major contributions to Western industrial development. At the end of the 1870s, while he was just 16, he abandoned his father's farm and moved to nearby Detroit. The population having swelled from around 15,000 when Henry's father first arrived in Michigan in the late 1840s to top a 100,000 people 30 years later when Henry relocated there. This was in 1879, and he soon found work as an apprentice to a machinist. This was the first of several jobs he held over the next 3 years with several companies in the city. He returned to Dearborn in 1882, the same year that Edison turned on the Pearl Street station in New York City and began the electrification of people's homes in Manhattan. Meanwhile, Ford started to work on Westinghouse Company, Edison's great rival. By the time Henry returned home, his father, like other farmers in the area, had already acquired a portable steam engine. Henry began spending a great deal of time with the machine, studying it down to the smallest detail. He became such a skilled mechanic that owners of steam engines began inviting him to repair their machine. Representatives from Westinghouse, having heard about the talented mechanic, offered him a job that involved servicing and repairing their steam engines. The Westinghouse company was developing machines that were used for various agricultural activities, notably the Westinghouse farm engine that became available in the mid-1880s, and which was used as a portable steam engine that could be plugged into sawmills and threshing units to provide power. Ford became adept at repairing these in Dearborn and the surrounding region. He spent much of the 1880s engaged in this and periodically working in Detroit, all the while developing his abilities as an engineer and mechanic. In 1891, as the electrification of Detroit was proceeding at a rapid pace, Ford took a job as an engineer with the Edison Illuminating Company. By 1893, he had become chief engineer. Ford and Edison would later become close friends. With ample time and resources at his disposal, Henry began pursuing his childhood dream during this period. Ford was engaged in the automobile revolution from the point which it really began in the mid-1880s. The first prototype of what we now call a car appeared in 1769, when a French inventor, named Nikolai Joseph Cuno, built a carriage-like machine, called the Fautier Vapor, that was propelled forward using a steam-powered locomotive. It was obvious to everyone that individual steam-powered carriages were impractical due to the enormous weight of the steam engine. Designers had figured out that while individual steam-powered carriages remained impractical, given the technology available in the early 19th century, large carriages connected together and placed on a track were much more feasible. This resulted in the development of the railways or trains in the early 19th century. But at the end of the 19th century, with the advent of oil and electricity, inventors began to return to the idea of individual transportation. Carl Benz invented what is generally regarded as the first modern automobile in 1885. In the years that followed, a host of well-known European car companies such as Peugeot, Tatra, Renault, and Fiat were established in Austria, France, and Italy. It is interesting to note that even at that time, many inventors preferred cars with electric motors, but soon, as we shall see, they would lose out to gasoline-powered cars. Beginning in the 1880s, while he was working as a mechanic and later after he joined the Edison Illuminating Company, he worked part-time on building his own engines and prototype cars. From early on, Ford became convinced that the best way to do so was to try to develop petroleum-fueled engines rather than electric ones or those that used coal-fired steam engines, as he had dreamed of in childhood. He read about the gas engine, what is now called the internal combustion engine, in a magazine. At that time, very few people in America knew about the gas engine or how it worked. Henry didn't know either. He decided to build his own gas engine. After several years of experimentation, 30-year-old Henry started his first homemade engine in the kitchen of his apartment. This was the beginning of a journey that would lead to the creation of the quadricycle in 1906. He developed this while living in Detroit from 1896 onward. It was basically a double bicycle with 4 large wheels like those used on bicycles standing at the 4 corners of a frame that had 2 seats on it. The 1890s and 1900s were a time when many inventors in Europe and America were trying to bring their prototypes into mass production. But this required investment to establish commercial companies capable of undertaking serious technological development and creating a commercially viable product. Ford was one of those who needed investors. At that time, cars were not what they are today. They were something like electric cars in the 2010s. They were handmade in limited quantities and were very expensive. In 1899, Ford partnered with financial backers and other businessmen to establish the Detroit Automobile Company. But the venture ran into trouble. The cars were too expensive, production was too slow, and a sharp conflict arose between Ford's plans and the investors' desire for a quick profit. The company closed as early as 1901, having produced only about 20 cars. At the time, cars were seen as toys for racing. Ford decided to prove his skill and attract new sponsors by creating his own race car, the Sweepstaker. The car could reach speeds of up to 75 kilometers per hour and unexpectedly won a race in 1901 in Grosse Pointe. After the victory, Ford was able to attract a group of sponsors and secure $30,000 in investment, a huge sum at the time. Ford was appointed chief engineer and received 1/6 of the company's shares. Thus, the Henry Ford Company was born. But history soon repeated itself. Investors wanted to bring a commercially ready car to market as soon as possible, expensive, prestigious cars for wealthy buyers, while Henry was too preoccupied with the details, spending time and money on constantly improving his models in an effort to create a simpler and more reliable car, rather than bringing the product to market. By 1902, Ford had left the company. Ironically, it was this very company that would later become the Cadillac Company. After 2 setbacks, Henry realized he no longer wanted to be completely dependent on investors. He found a suitable partner, Alexander Malcolmson, a major coal merchant from Detroit, who, in turn, brought in other businessmen. The Ford Motor Company was founded as early as 1903. The owners included 12 investors, among them Malcolmson and Henry Ford, who each owned 25% of the company's shares. Ford also secured greater freedom of action for himself, and the investors confirmed their willingness to wait. Eventually, this would become the Ford Company we know today. The first finished car rolled off the assembly line in Detroit and was sold just 1 month after the company's founding. It was the Model A. This was followed by the Model B, C, F, K, and others. All these early models were produced in small batches and were essentially experimental. In 1908, the Model T was introduced to the market, a car that would become legendary, but the real breakthrough would come in 1913. The fact is that by that time, there were already many automakers in Europe and America, but none of them had managed to create a car that could be mass-produced at a price affordable to ordinary middle-class people. Production was manual. Workers moved around the car, and it took 12 hours to assemble a single vehicle. Ford and his engineers were looking for ways to radically speed up production of the T model, because demand far exceeded their production capacity. One day, Henry visited a Chicago slaughterhouse, where carcasses moved slowly toward the workers. He also studied the practices of canneries and bakeries, where goods moved toward the workers. Ford's team decided to adopt this approach. The idea was simple: to have car parts move toward the workers, with each worker performing only one or a few operations. To this end, a new large factory was built, the Highland Park plant. At first, individual parts, such as the engine and chassis, were placed on the conveyor belt. After a year of experimentation, by the end of 1913, full integration was achieved. A moving conveyor belt was created for the assembly of the entire car. The time required to fully assemble a Model T was reduced from 12 hours to 93 minutes. It was a breakthrough. Workers no longer had to walk around the machine. Instead, each performed their own specific task. After the introduction of full assembly line, production of the Model T skyrocketed. While 68,000 cars were produced in 1912, the year before the assembly line was introduced, production reached 200,000 in 1914, 500,000 in 1916, and, for the first time in history, 1 million in 1922. By 1923, half of all cars in the world were Ford Model Ts. The growth in production was not the only consequence of the new production method. Thanks to rising production volumes, the cost of producing a single car began to decline. As a result, car prices began to fall. In 1909, the T model cost $825. For example, the average American worker's annual salary at the time was about $400. But by 1925, the T model cost 3 times less, about $260. From that point on, the car became affordable not only to the wealthy, but also to the average farmer or worker with a moderate income. Ford once said, "I will build a car that the man who makes it can afford to buy." But the assembly line didn't bring only positive changes. Immediately after its introduction, a serious conflict arose with the workers. The workers hated the assembly line for its monotony, rigid pace, and the devaluation of the mechanic's skills. As a result, workers began to leave, often for competing companies. At times, employee turnover reached nearly 400%, meaning that to retain 100 workers, the company had to hire 400 workers per year. To solve this problem, Ford took revolutionary measures. He doubled workers' wages, from $2.50 to $5, which was twice the average market wage. He also reduced the workday at his factories to 8 hours. These measures impacted the labor market, and other companies, to avoid being left without workers, were forced to adopt similar measures, which ultimately improved workers' conditions and, to some extent, influenced our modern way of life. In the 1920s, Ford also introduced a 5-day workweek, at a time when the vast majority of workers had only 1 day off. Later, Henry Ford openly stated that this was not altruism. He believed that overwork reduced efficiency, and that well-rested workers performed better and were less prone to illness. Moreover, workers stopped leaving his factories. By 1927, production of the Model T had reached its peak, more than 2 million cars per year, with a total of about 15 million units by that time. But times were changing. Powerful competitors were emerging on the horizon, and the Ford company's flagship, the T model, was rapidly becoming obsolete. While Ford Company held about half of the entire U.S. market in the early 1920s, by the end of the decade it held about 35% of the market. General Motors had taken the lead, while Chrysler was in third place. The reason for this was that Henry relied too heavily on the already outdated Model T, ignoring consumer preferences and market changes. He ignored the voices around him calling for modernization, and even the voice of his own son, who constantly proposed new car designs. At the time, competitors were capturing an increasing share of the market through diverse models, design updates, and marketing. Ford could no longer ignore the figures showing a steep annual decline in sales. As a result, in 1927 Ford ceased production of the Model T and switched to manufacturing a new model, the Model A. The new car featured a redesigned exterior and a more powerful 40-horsepower engine. The project proved to be a commercial success and even restored the company to its position as market leader in the late 1920s. But then came the Great Depression. In 1932, facing financial difficulties, Ford discontinued the Model A. The company gradually began to switch to more frequent model changes. That same year, the Ford Model B and the Model 18, with its famous V8 engine, were introduced. It was a breakthrough. A car with a V8 engine became available for $600, reigniting buyer interest. Subsequently, the V8 engine was used for decades, right up until the 1950s. Subsequently, the Model 40, Model 44, and the Ford Mercury, designed by Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford, were introduced. Although the company updated its designs and technology annually, introducing the Mercury in 1939, General Motors firmly maintained its leadership. During the war years, the automotive industry was completely shifted to military production. The Ford Company received orders to manufacture military trucks, off-road vehicles, tank engines, and the legendary B-24 Liberator bomber. There is a certain irony in the fact that Ford was an outspoken anti-Semite before the war. He accused Jewish bankers of a global conspiracy and claimed that they were the ones instigating wars. In the 1920s, he founded his own newspaper with an anti-Semitic slant, which was printed and published in his hometown of Dearborn. Adolf Hitler himself openly admired him and even awarded him the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor for foreigners, in honor of Henry Ford's 75th birthday. Even during the war, Ford's factories located in Germany were working for the Nazi war effort and even used forced labor. However, it remains unclear whether Henry Ford controlled these enterprises and whether the Ford Company profited from its operations in Germany. Despite military contracts, the company found itself in a difficult financial situation in the post-war years. Ford's only son, Edsel Ford, who was running the company at the time, died suddenly of stomach cancer in 1943, while Henry was already 80 years old. Ford Sr. once again took on the role of president, but by that time he was already severely weakened by age and several strokes. The company was in crisis. There was chaos in management, mounting debt, and a loss of market share to General Motors. Under pressure from his inner circle, Henry Ford retired in 1945. He was succeeded by his grandson, 28-year-old Henry Ford II. On April 7, 1947, at 11:40 p.m., Henry Ford died of a stroke at the age of 83. After Ford Sr.'s departure, there was a generational shift in the company's leadership, accompanied by a change in approach and vision for the future. A young team of managers led by Ford II attempted to breathe new life into the company. New models kept appearing. The 1949 Ford model became a sales hit. The F-Series pickup truck line became a bestseller in the U.S. for decades. In 1956, to attract major investments, Ford went public, marking the largest IPO in U.S. history at the time. From that time to the present day, Ford has produced a vast number of legendary cars, many of which became bestsellers, while some went down in the history of the global automotive industry and became style icons. To this day, Ford holds a leading position, ranking among the top 3 American automakers and the top 10 global manufacturers. Today, the Ford emblem is arguably one of the most recognizable in the world. Henry Ford was not perfect. He was conservative, harsh, cynical, and even immoral in certain respects. But he changed the world in a way that few others could.